It's great to be here with all of you today, and we are, of course, taking extra precautions against the Delta variant of this virus. Even so, it's just a pleasure to join you, including those who are joining us today virtually. Let me begin my remarks by first of all saying that our hearts go out to the people of Afghanistan and to all of our allies for the scenes of human suffering that we are seeing there. We especially are thinking in this moment about the sacrifices made by our men and women in uniform, by the countless Georgian service members and their families, and we are all monitoring what's happening there, many of whom lost their lives while serving our country. We must work tirelessly to ensure that those who served our country in Afghanistan have the resources they need not only to survive, but to thrive. Know that I am committed to tirelessly supporting Georgia's military bases and the brave service members and veterans who call Georgia home, and that I am committed to making sure that we keep Americans safe and our allies safe during this very, very difficult moment. That said, I'm especially pleased to come to talk to you now as the Senate stands in recess. Not just to discuss some of the work that I've been doing on behalf of Georgia and Washington, but to talk about the brighter days ahead for our state. Let me say that to serve as Georgia's junior senator is indeed an honor. It's the honor of my life, although I sometimes have to wonder when I think of being called the junior senator, how does John Ossoff get to be the senior senator? And I'm the junior senator. We got elected at the same time. And he's several years my junior. But his last name begins with an O and mine begins with a W, and that's just how things go sometimes. But seriously, I'm very honored to work alongside him. And we're both very proud of the incredible opportunity to represent the people of our home state in the United States Senate. We've got a lot of work that we've accomplished over the last several months, and we've got a lot of work to do. The pandemic has been tough on so many fronts for our frontline workers, our essential workers. I think the pandemic laid bare truths that we should have more easily seen before the pandemic. Many of the folks that we have marginalized and not stood up as strongly as we should have stood up for them, they're now called essential workers. They're essential workers. They ought to be paid an essential wage. They ought to have essential benefits. But we're thinking about so many folks who stood up, certainly our healthcare workers, hardworking families, our schools, our educators. I think parents have a deeper appreciation for the work that teachers do. Small businesses and companies in every corner of the state. We've all had to push our way through this pandemic together. But through it all, Georgians have been resilient. Georgians stood up in historic numbers to reshape our federal government and pave the way for expansive relief that has helped our state and nation begin to curb the worst economic and public health consequences of the pandemic. We still have a lot of work to do on that front, but indeed we have come a long way. And now as we keep pushing to get more people vaccinated and get Georgians to work, we have a once-in-a-generation opportunity to set a course for the future that will keep our state and our economy moving forward. We're dealing with a crisis that has presented opportunities. Rainbows only come after storms. We have to seize the moment, the lessons that must be learned in order to move forward together. And in that spirit, we were able to kickstart our recovery efforts with the American Rescue Plan, and we even made good bipartisan gains earlier this year toward keeping our state globally competitive by investing in our research and development capacity, including efforts to boost the United States semiconductor production to help Georgia businesses like our Kia plant in West Point, Georgia. Now we turn to infrastructure. We turn to an infrastructure program which is also a jobs program. And I like to put it this way: America needs a home improvement project. And that's why before we left Washington, I'm proud that the Senate was able to pass on a bipartisan basis the infrastructure package, which is going to provide robust funding to Georgia to repair our aging infrastructure, address climate change, and support job growth that will move our state into the future, especially with regard to clean energy jobs. I believe that when we center people in our policy making, we have a better chance of getting the policy right. It's not just about the data or the statistics. It's about the people behind the data. It's about our neighbors, the folks who worship with us at the temple, at the church, the people whose children attend school with our children. Those are the faces that have to be centered as we think about the best policy. And so I'm a strong believer that in order to get the policy right, we have to have this view. And I believe that in order to have an economy that's sustainable, our environment must be sustainable too. Those things are not mutually exclusive. One really depends on the other. We have to have a plan that is both economically sustainable and ecologically sustainable. And so I'm glad that we were able to take a major step in the Senate, Democrats and Republicans together, to pave the road to the future by making strong investments in improving our highways and repairing our crumbling bridges, expanding broadband in the areas that need it most, and strengthening and expanding public transportation so more people in Georgia can get to more places, which is only the start of what's in this bill. We made robust investments in programs and policy changes that could help fund important large-scale projects like the Midtown Connector or the Stitch. I was proud to lead efforts to make sure all of this was in the bill. I also advocated for significant funding for low and no emission buses, and I led efforts to secure strong investments to green our yellow school buses with electric school buses. This provision was based on legislation I introduced, and it is going to support jobs at Georgia companies like Fort Valley's Bluebird Corporation. Like many of you, I grew up on Bluebird buses, and I'm so proud that the effort to green our yellow school buses is centered here in Georgia through our legislative efforts, but by the work that's happening right there in Fort Valley, Georgia. We were also able to make strong investments in freight and address key rail safety concerns that will support rail suppliers in our state and make shipping more efficient, which will help keep Georgia companies and our economy strong. I even partnered with Ted Cruz. Yes, that Ted Cruz. To put a provision in the bipartisan infrastructure bill that will help promote the planned I-14 extension that will link key military installations and emerging technology hubs across our state from Columbus to Augusta. This legislation will revitalize the infrastructure of our communities, but I want to emphasize these investments, directly and indirectly, will help support and grow jobs in our state right now and into the future. As another example, the bill includes significant funding to build out our state's electric vehicle charging infrastructure. A few months ago, I visited the SK Innovation Facility up in Commerce, Georgia, where we've helped them work to keep their factory online, including the roughly 2,600 jobs that factory will support. I can tell you, investing in Georgia's electric vehicle charging infrastructure only encourages more companies like SK to make a home in our state. And that means more jobs. Jobs give dignity to struggling people. They provide a way out for struggling families. They revitalize our economy. Before we left Washington, the Senate also started work on the next economic package that's going to help families, workers, and businesses in our state continue to thrive. This is important work that is only going to help fuel our recovery and set our state up for future success. For instance, I've spent a lot of time fighting to expand Medicaid in our state. Some of you will remember that this is a fight I took on long before I entered any race to be a United States Senator. It's the work and not necessarily any position that's been my focus. It's the mission. And I've taken that mission into the Senate. And I'm excited that we're now pushing in this legislation to finally expand health care access to Georgians with low incomes through my Medicaid Saves Lives Act. I've seen firsthand at hospitals like Phoebe Putney and Albany the costs on patients and our healthcare system because we haven't expanded Medicaid in our state. There's just no logical reason for this. This is sheer politics. And while politicians play games, I've seen up close the human beings who are caught up in the fray. Over the last several weeks, that's why I've taken to the Senate floor to share stories of Georgians who would have benefited if Georgia had previously expanded Medicaid. And I even successfully fought for money to incentivize Georgia to do so in the American Rescue Package. We can improve health outcomes and save lives, as well as strengthen our ailing rural health care systems where we've seen a hospital close every year for the last 10 years. We can create jobs by expanding healthcare access in our state. And I'm going to keep fighting to make sure this plan stays in the economic package. While doing that, I'm also pushing in this package, the reconciliation package, to make sure we're providing relief to all of our small farmers who have been hurt economically in this pandemic. I spent a lot of time traveling through rural Georgia, and I know that when we invest in our farmers, we not only lift up rural communities, but our economy across the state. I'm also pushing for even more investments in rural broadband to make sure our farmers have the support and resources they need to keep our agriculture industry strong. That's on top of efforts to extend the expanded child tax credit, which is already helping cut child poverty in our state. The experts tell us that that provision alone will cut child poverty in our nation in half, investing in child care to help support working families and more. And so when the Senate comes back into session, know that I'm going to be pushing to get these priorities for our state over the finish line, because these are the bold solutions Georgians tell me we need for our state. Before I close, and nobody believes a preacher when he says, as I close. Preachers have 4 or 5 closings. I only have one. Let me speak briefly about the fight in Washington to protect the sacred right to vote, which I've been focused on in the Senate. I feel strongly that we must work on the infrastructure of our communities while also working to repair the infrastructure of our democracy. Nothing could be more important. You can't have one without the other. And I'm committed to moving both of these priorities forward. That's why I've been working tirelessly with a diverse group of my colleagues, from Chuck Schumer to Joe Manchin to Amy Klobuchar, to put together the strongest piece of voting rights legislation we can. Legislation that will not only protect the right to vote no matter where you live, but will specifically address the onslaught of state-level voter suppression efforts we've seen take root in Georgia and other states across the nation. I'm very clear about what must be our priority in this moment. We have to fight for infrastructure and the infrastructure of our democracy. Voting rights are preservative of all other rights, and it is what makes it possible to address the challenges we need to take. It is what made it possible to pass the relief we needed to get over the hump of the pandemic and jumpstart our recovery. This is going to be the first order of business when the Senate comes back into session in September. Voting rights. Know that I am at the center of these efforts, and that I'm committed to working to get federal voting rights legislation passed this Congress, because we have to pass voting rights no matter what. I know that so many of you in this room know the importance of this fight, and I appreciate the steps many of you have taken, not just to protect the right to vote here in Georgia, but to keep our state moving forward in the face of the pandemic and other challenges. And as we move forward, we are inspired by those who paid the ultimate sacrifice and those whose entire lives have been committed to this work. Among them, John Lewis, who was my parishioner, in many ways my mentor. I feel that he is urging us on in this defining American moment to make sure that we have a democracy that embraces all of our children. I look forward to having more conversation in the days ahead, but know that it is indeed the honor of my life to represent our state, a state where I was born, raised, attended college, educated, where I've served as the pastor of a church up the street you may have heard of for a few years. I'm Georgia through and through, and it is my great honor to represent our state in the United States Senate, and know that you will always have a partner and a collaborator in me. As I close, keep the faith and keep looking up.